Hello and welcome to World Talks with TVP World. I'm your host, Maciej Wilowski. Poland's economy is flying high. Today, according to one metric, GDP per capita adjusted for the cost of living, Poland now ranks ahead of countries like Japan, Spain, and New Zealand. Joining us to discuss Poland's economic success story is Anna Bjerde, Managing Director of Operations at the World Bank. Anna, pleasure to be with you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So, Anna, we see that despite a series of global challenges, including the pandemic, including tariffs, the war in Ukraine, of course, Poland's economy has proven resilient. What, in your opinion, are some of the factors behind that resilience?
Yeah, no, great. Well, Poland is, in fact, a success story, and it's a young country. If you think about it, in just 35 years has made huge changes and grown to become a high-income country with a lot of lessons to be drawn from. And I think in recent years, what we've seen pay off is a diversified economy, first and foremost, strong institutions, which is something Poland invested in early on, a market economy open to the world, open in the region, and also a focus on human capital. So education is important, and there are high skills in Poland which are also paying off.
Thank you so much. So coming off a strong 2025, where the Polish economy expanded nearly 4% last year, what does the World Bank, because your institution, of course, provides economic forecasts for distinct regions of the world and individual countries, what does the World Bank see for Poland and perhaps other countries in Central Europe heading into 2026 and beyond?
Yeah. So what's interesting with the recent growth is that it's been primarily led by an increase in consumption. And of course, that's a strong source of growth and will continue to be. But what we're seeing for Poland, which we think is particularly interesting, is that going forward, we're seeing also an increase in investment. So growth will continue to come from consumption, but will also increasingly come from an increase in investment. And this is important because Poland actually, as a percentage to GDP, investment is around 17–18%. And that's actually quite low. So what we're seeing now is a response, which is where both the public and the private sector is starting to invest more. And we believe that for the future in Poland, we need to see more investment. So this is actually a very, very good signal.
Now, you had mentioned investment. What, in your opinion, is the more important part of that equation, private investment or government investment?
Yeah, both are important because we see at the World Bank there is a role for the public sector in what we call foundational infrastructure, and in Poland I think we continue to see a big important part of innovation, and particularly around skilling, because the world is changing, AI, tech is coming, but the private sector has to invest because private sector actually is where jobs are generated and also where innovation comes. The other thing I think we're seeing that is paying off and is making a difference is the accelerated use of EU structural funds and EU funds in general, which of course are also fueling the investment that's happening in Poland.
Thank you so much for that. So moving on to the next section here, what are, in your opinion, some of the biggest challenges facing the economy? A lot of analysts have noted that the budget deficit is of particular concern. Last year, the deficit was approaching 7% of GDP. What are the risk factors that Polish authorities may need to be aware of in terms of monitoring the deficit?
Yeah, no, I think Poland is going through, in very many ways, a response to what's happening globally. And for Poland being in very close proximity to a war in Europe, of course, increase in defense spending accounts for a significant increase in budgetary resources needed for defense. And that's quite natural, and we're seeing that across the region. In fact, many countries around Europe are increasing defense spending. But what I think it means for Poland going forward in terms of its economic growth strategy is, again, pivoting towards new sources of growth. And we see a big, important factor to be investing more in innovation, investing more with the private sector's help, taking advantage of things like digitalization and new skills. One piece of information that we monitor closely is productivity, especially when you have a tight labor market, as Poland has. And Poland actually still is, in terms of productivity, is only 2/3 where the EU average is. So we see a big need to continue to focus on increasing productivity and doing so through digitalization, through new skilling, and utilizing new tech much more. And we actually believe Poland is well suited for this. There's a lot of really, really good education here, a lot of students who are really good at math, and there's entrepreneurs who are in the tech space. So I think Poland can really leverage this and go to scale.
So we look at the public finances of Poland and the rising deficit. How much, in your view, of the recent growth that Poland has experienced has in part been financed by rising deficits, perhaps the military spending, defense expenditures? Has that contributed to growth in recent years?
Well, the growth has, as I mentioned, been predominantly led by consumption. Now it's turning to investment. Defense spending, of course, is beefing up on inventory of defense equipment and being more prepared. The biggest part going forward will be that Poland continues this investment drive. And here again, using the structural funds is helping. There's a lot of investment needed in energy. Just take energy alone. Every country is thinking through, how am I prepared on the energy supply side, particularly as AI and tech are driven by having enough energy. And here, I think Poland has been in a transition on the energy sector for quite some time, and now is of course also starting to think, like every other country, is how do we utilize sources like nuclear as part of the energy mix going forward. So I think we'll see a big push on this, and again it will have to come from a private sector stepping in as it can do, but also the public sector taking some of the part as it goes forward.
And what do you think can be done to stimulate that private sector investment? Because when we look at a country like Poland compared to, for example, the United States, where you have these scores and even hundreds of Fortune 500 companies, but in Poland, on the other hand, there aren't that many homegrown companies that have a large market cap or that have a large presence on the global market. So what do you think can be done to stimulate the growth of those homegrown companies?
Yeah, it's a great point. So the strength of the economy here, of course, is that it's diversified, which is good. Another strength is that it's connected to the rest of the world. Poland has opted for a competitive, open economic model, which is good. One of the issues is, of course, that small to medium-sized enterprises, which are really the engine of an economy and the engine of growth and source of employment, needs to be able to grow. And SMEs grow when there's good access to finance. And here we believe that Poland needs to think beyond the banking sector. So thinking about capital markets development, access to equity, risk capital, so that these companies can take risk and grow. The other thing is that we see an opportunity, again, for the public sector playing more of an enabling role. And here, again, having private companies be able to step into spaces that are otherwise dominated by, let's say, state-owned enterprises. So how do you get a good mix between public and private going forward, we think will be very important for Poland to think through.
How willing, in your opinion, are investors when it comes to investing in Poland? Because we see, for example, the yield on Polish government bonds just fell below 5%. How effective could that be, even when it comes to, for example, reducing the deficit with that foreign capital and that investment? Could that be an effective strategy to, for example, finance the budget?
Yeah, so actually we do a variety of different analysis to look at the business environment in countries. And Poland in general ranks quite well on business environment and the enabling framework, enabling environment for businesses. Of course, at the end of the day, private companies need to thrive by having access to capital. And it needs to be risk-patient capital, but it also needs to be long-term capital. We at the World Bank Group actually have arms for all of this. We have a public sector, but most importantly, we have a private sector arm that provides both debt and equity to companies in Poland, but also for Polish companies abroad. And that's something that we would like to invest in, because we think Poland can also export a lot of skills, knowledge, and expertise. But we also provide guarantees, and we see a lot of interest, especially as Poland tries to attract even more FDI. What are some of the guarantee instruments that can be used to mobilize even more interest coming into Poland, particularly as we start thinking about and turning to the reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine?
Now, moving to that topic, actually, I wanted to talk about Ukraine for a few minutes. Part of the World Bank, your mission is to alleviate poverty around the globe in addition to promoting economic growth. We see that amid all the suffering happening in Ukraine? And if and when peace comes, what does the World Bank see as its mission in the rebuilding of Ukraine and overall efforts in that country?
Yeah. So before coming to Poland just a few days ago, I was in Ukraine for a few days. We have been in Ukraine since the early 90s, and of course throughout this terrible war have stayed very much engaged in Ukraine and have provided a significant amount of financing to be able to help the government get through the difficult period by providing essential services to its population, but also doing sort of critical repair and recovery as the war happens. We also have played a very important role in doing diagnostics. So we just released a few days ago a new damage and needs assessment for Ukraine, which estimates the needs of investment going forward as Ukraine hopefully steps into a recovery mode. And that's been very important. We also work with Ukraine, including also putting together an expert panel to think what's the economy of Ukraine going to look like, because war has changed so many things for Ukraine. And we believe Ukraine actually has a huge opportunity to turn the page to a more prosperous economy, one that moves from, let's say, heavy industry and agriculture dependence to technology, to AI, to lighter manufacturing, to more private sector. And that's really our focus, to think through what does it take for Ukraine to be able to grow sustainably higher. Even before wartime, the growth was not enough. Grow sustainably higher. As you mentioned, there's been an increase in poverty because of this war. There's people outside Ukraine that need to come back. They will come back if they feel there's prosperity to be offered and they can help rebuild their country. So we're very much involved in the diagnostics and the planning of the economy of the future of Ukraine. Energy is a huge issue right now in the short term and in the medium term. No country can do without reliable energy. So we're also helping with an energy strategy for Ukraine, both in the medium and longer term. But ultimately, it will need to be a very different type of economy where the public sector is enabling and we really make space and room for the private sector. Poland will be, of course, incredibly important, given its proximity for logistics, for services, but also Polish companies and interest in being able to invest in Ukraine, as well as providing a platform for other countries through Poland to invest in Ukraine. And we're delighted to see Poland is actually hosting the next Ukraine Recovery Conference in the summer. And of course, the World Bank Group looks forward to participating in that.
Now, one last question, since we are slowly but surely running out of time. I think one of the biggest obstacles that Ukraine will be facing in its post-war recovery is the demographic situation. And this is a situation that all of Central and Eastern Europe basically has in common. How could that, even with all these demographic pressures and the very large projected population decline, how can Ukraine overcome that in its recovery?
Yes. So Ukraine has a huge labor shortage for the reasons you mentioned. And I think that actually poses a huge challenge. And it actually also drives what type of economy they need to create. So like Poland, but for different reasons and different circumstances, it needs to be one where productivity is very high. And it needs to be one where you can think about, in a very, very aggressive and ambitious manner, the use of AI, the use of automation, even robotics. And I have to say, Ukraine over the last few years has already started changing its economy so much through the defense tech and the skills and capacity they've developed domestically to be able to even fight a war.
Anna Bjerde from the World Bank, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for today's edition of World Talks. Please stay tuned for more on TVP World.